Good. Okay, we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. And the meeting is called to order. And if we could have a roll call, please. Jeff, if you'd start.
Jeff Marks.
Alex Robinette.
Ryan Clinton.
Tom Farrell.
Duke Garwood.
And Dave is not going to be able to be here today, but we have a quorum, so we will get started. The next item I have is a public comment. So if any of our citizens would like to make a comment, address anything that's not on the agenda, then we'll do it. Shanti?
Okay. This is Tori of Shanti Jayakumar, 3309 Parklands Drive. I just want to thank each one of you. This is my first meeting, in person or online, whatever you want to call it, to this body. And I really wanted to say thank you for volunteering your time. Oh my God, your presentation, it was like a thesis. And I am so happy that finally we are coming back to the FAR. I won't make any other comments other than when Tom was mayor, one of those between the 4 times he was mayor, that was one of the things we discussed for one whole year, floor area to whatever you call it, and it got thrown out completely. It was a thesis for somebody's master's, I think, right, Tom?
It was.
And it was going really great. It had a bunch of people on the committee for a whole year. There were real estate developers, there were real estate agents, there were citizens, all category of people. It was so well done. I don't even know whether, I thought I had a copy of it, but I couldn't locate it. But I think the city might have it. But you have gone way over whatever we discussed back then. And I thank you very much. And I also want to thank Alex and Ryan and Tom and Duke. And I don't know who else is missing.
Dave Bench.
I just want to personally thank you for taking on this very, very significant role in determining the direction in which the next 50 years, I suppose, of our city will be considering the residential. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shanti.
Yeah.
Do we have any other citizens?
Yeah.
Please.
This is Ricky Joshi. I purchased a home at 303 Pleasant Drive, so I'm new. Not living in it yet. Was in the process of renovating the home. So that hopefully will one day be a forever home for at least 5 or 10 years. I'm here. This is a place I've always looked at and wanted to be part of this community, and excited to become part of this community. And I think there's so many beautiful reasons for wanting to be part of Rollingwood, which is why I purchased the home in this area. One thing that has sort of come to my attention, which is frustrating for me as a new homeowner, unaware of some of the restrictions or lack thereof here in Rollingwood, is my own property values being at risk by virtue of new construction that I think is exploiting code. And particularly I look at the home that's going up next to mine. It seems reasonably sized for the lot. I think it would pass FAR. It's 7,000 square feet. However, if you look at really where the driveway starts to the top, it looks like, in my opinion, in excess of 40 feet. That is literally 7.5 feet away from my yard line. And looking at that steel structure that wasn't there before, as someone who just bought their home, was probably one of the most disheartening things I've ever experienced as a new homeowner. It wasn't the vision I had for my house when I bought it. And there's so many expensive, nice, modern, highly impactful homes in this area, but I think that without proper regulation, some things can be exploited to really put up, office building type units that I do not think help anyone except the builders who are trying to maximize their their profit per square foot, because that's how Austin is judged. So it was really kind of disheartened to see the building going up next to mine, and I call it a building, not a home, and am nervous that not only is this house going up, which is towering over mine and others in the area, But future homes is what I worry about more. I know there's a residence, I probably don't know if I should do specifics, but there's a home on Park Drive that looks like it's not from this world. I don't see how that's a home that's desirable to live next to. And I'm concerned about the future of homes on my street. There's a house for lease across the street that might be sold, and I'm worried that that thing could go up 45 feet. It's on a hill, and one last thing is, hills are certain ways that, you put a house in a ditch or something, and it's down, and it can go up 45 feet. I don't see it anyway. I don't see 45 feet in any stretch of the imagination. So that's my thing. Height restriction for me is something that's huge. Put me on stilts, I'm taller than Michael Jordan. I just think that, it really should be looked into by city council. And I think that if there's any argument that increased height increases property values, I would differ from that greatly. I think it turns this from a beautiful residential community into a urban community, and that is not going to improve residential home values for anyone except the builder. That's it. Thank you.
Well, listen, welcome to Rollingwood. Welcome to Rollingwood.
Thank you.
And
Yeah, we
I hope
appreciate your
I
comments.
hope you stay for the presentation because we will have a whole thing on height today. So,
Yeah.
Great.
yeah.
And
One request from everyone, if you can all email the city, we are tabulating and compiling and putting some stats around the emails, so that'll be helpful, in addition to these comments right now. Thank you.
Great. Do we have any other citizens that would like to make a comment on items not on the agenda?
I just have a quick comment.
Sure.
I'll stand here. My name's Duncan Ashworth. I live on Hatley Drive. And, what we're talking about here is aesthetics and what we want Rollingwood to look like in the future. I think along with all these actions and committees that we're going to be having, nothing is going to work better than having photographs, of houses that are along the way, so we can say, this conforms to this research, so that we can have a visual, because this is not an engineering project. This is one where we have to say, what do we want Rollingwood to look like forward? I think that'd be best served by having photographs of different examples.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Duncan. Do we have any other citizens? Seeing none. Oh, Sandy?
I just want to follow up with Duncan's statement. Sandy Keller at 307 Inwood. He said this was aesthetics. I don't know that I can say that this only pertains to aesthetics. As we consider things like impervious cover limits, we're talking about drainage. We're a city that has no stormwater drainage system. We have a minimal tree ordinance, and we drain everything through the creeks and the streets and people's properties. So these are things that are germane, not just aesthetically, but functionally. That's all I wanted to add.
Thank you, Sandy.
Fair enough.
Do we have any other residents? Seeing none, we're ready to move on. So we will go ahead on our consent agenda, discussion and possible action on the minutes for the May 3rd, 2023 CRC-RC meeting.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second. All those in favor, signify by aye. Those opposed, the ayes have it. They are approved. Okay. On our regular agenda, Duke is going to have to leave a little earlier, so with everybody's indulgence, I'd like to take up item number 7 first. Jeff, if you would take that, if that's okay with the
Yep.
committee.
Is there a way to share the agenda on the Zoom? Because I have some visuals to share. Okay.
Duncan, that's for you.
Yeah, thank you. That was good.
There will be pictures as well.
We're listening.
Okay, great. Thank you. So you can see this chart, the first chart. This is the Florida area ratio as calculated based on TCAD data as of January 1st, 2023. So TCAD provides public information to us on the square footage of the home and the square footage of the lot. So a simple dividing the two, you get a ratio, and it basically tells you how much buildable space you have relative to the lot. One of the hypotheses that we had after the first couple of meetings was it wasn't as much a concern around while there's a lot of conversation around height and the size of the homes, there have been bigger homes that have been here historically. But those homes have traditionally been on larger lots. So I think the home that that Ricky mentioned earlier on Park Hills is a bit atypical because it's literally the biggest possible home you can build on that lot, and the lot slopes towards the street. So I think it's the combination of the two that is kind of why we're all here and talking. So we basically said, let's take a look at the Florida area ratio of the city to see what does it look like across our neighborhood. And you could see, I don't know if we can zoom in a bit, but the big hill at the center of this chart is around between 15 to 20%. So the FAR for most of the homes is in the 15 to 20 range. And then it tails off pretty dramatically by the time you get to 35%. So the very right over here, this is 35. So 5% of the homes exceed 35% as of January 1st, 2023. But of that 5%, some of them creep all the way out to 50 to 60%. So I think the home on Park Hills we were discussing is at 53%. So my theory is when you combine the high FAR plus the high height, you have conversations like this. So that was the starting point. If we could go to the next, let me see if we can find. Okay. If you go to could we change the?
Press escape.
Okay. Yep. Let's see how to scroll down. Is there a mouse or something? I don't know how to click on this. You can click? Okay. Maybe I can just walk over there and do it. Could you go back to the agenda and then go to the third link? Yep. So we can have fun with the data that we have now. So we have data on the current pipeline is what I call it. So it's the homes that have active permits and pending permits. The city has square footage data that they've tabulated. I don't know that this is a pure apples to apples with the TCAD data. I suspect that the city data reports higher square footage, possibly because it's including square footage of the porches, garages, covered space, things like that. So further work is needed, but it can kind of give us a ballpark idea of what the homes that are in the pipeline look like. And we can link that data set to the data set from TCAD to find the square footage of the lot. So if you go to the next one, please. Yep.
Jeff,
Yes.
pardon me 1 second. Everybody, TCAD is the Travis County Appraisal District, just in case, just to make sure everybody knows.
I think we can go to the fifth one, actually. Okay. Yep. So what this chart is, this shows historical migration of the FAR in the city over time. So TCAD has sent us the data. We can get this data for any year that we want to get it for. So this is just the years that I looked into. So we had a bit of a challenge because I had this data set. It doesn't take much time to create the graphs, but I have a day job. I have 4 kids. I couldn't do it. I didn't have the time to do it. So I had been reading a newsletter from an ex-CTO of mine. His name is Sean Lensborn. He writes a prompts.finance newsletter on AI. So I just asked him, I said, hey, this is public data. Can I just give you the data set? And I know you use AI to do some data analytics. maybe you can help me with this. And he literally, within I think 30 minutes, he turned this around for us, which was pretty cool. So what this is, this shows the FAR gravitation over time, and you can see it's starting to tip up there. The top of it shows the homes that are greater than 35%, and obviously you can see it's grown historically. The 20 to 25% has grown as well. So we can kind of see where the trend is, and then I haven't done the work yet, but we can look at what's in the active and pending homes to see what that would look like and how much that would change the dynamic of the neighborhood. And then if we go to the next one, the last one. So this is another one. So this shows if we wanted to see it plotted over the neighborhood, just to see where the homes with the high FAR percentages are. You could see what it looked like in 2012. Sorry, 2002 is the first one. So the red shows kind of the bigger dots are the higher FAR homes, and kind of the areas where it's higher. This is I think in 2000, and this is as of now. So you can see kind of some of the neighborhoods with the bigger red dots are the areas that at least the data is showing have the bigger homes relative to the lots. So that concludes things. Any questions from here on the data?
Yes, I do have a question. I'm wondering if FAR is the complete metric that we need to use because it's, we talk about air-conditioned space. So if it's single story, doesn't that allow you to just build a house out to the absolute minimum setback? I mean, is that something that we want also, or should there be another parameter
Yeah,
there?
So what we've been talking about is no single measure we shouldn't use any single measure, right? We were in the prior meetings we were kind of talking about maybe we use a couple of tools.
Yeah.
So I'm not advocating for this to be used solely, right? So if you do address height, it will also indirectly address FAR because you have less buildable space. But you could, in theory, build 15-foot stories, like a 2-story home. Your FAR is still going to be low, but it's still going to be really tall if you have 15-story floors, 15-foot floors. Sorry. But it's just one tool that we could have in the toolkit. So I mean, I would put it to the rest of the group. One thing that I'm advocating for is kind of a sliding scale between the two. So if you had lower height, maybe your FAR could be bumped up a bit, something like that. But I think that's for public debate for sure.
Yeah, and I think viewing, like you said, if you built out your entire buildable area at one level, well, the only impacts there are drainage and not necessarily on your neighbors. And so I don't think we would penalize somebody per se for building out their buildable area if it didn't have impacts and if the drainage could address
The
it.
drainage part, but then there's the aesthetics also of, if it's minimum setback.
Mr. Ashworth, could you speak in the microphone?
She needs to take minutes.
Sorry.
Yeah, there's certainly the drainage quantitative piece of this, but as well there's the aesthetics. If they're all single story, you meet the FAR requirements, then that's it still may not look very nice because it has minimum spacing between all the houses.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, I think what Jeff was saying, there has to be a few different metrics that maybe are squishy, that if it goes this way, it goes that way.
Yeah, I think that's right. Of the complaints I've seen, it hasn't been about a home that's just big on height or just big on FAR. I think it's the combination of the two is what we should be talking about.
Has anything like a tent been looked into?
Could you give, excuse me, would you mind just saying your name when you speak? No, you're good. You can good. Just say your name when you speak.
Ricky Joshi. A tent sort of restriction. I don't know if that's ever been brought up or thought about, but my house in Austin, there was a tent, I believe, kind of requirement, which I feel like
You want the McMansion ordinance.
not a McMansion ordinance,
That is the McMansion ordinance.
okay, I guess that's what I'm saying. Maybe that's what I'm saying, but basically just a tent so that you can't go super vertical close to an edge line. I think that's the issue I'm having with the home next to mine is just a lot of height very close to the street. So some sort of restriction that way it wouldn't impact a lower bodied house building to the edge, but a tall house at the corners of the lots it would impact.
Right.
If that's what they call a McMansion ordinance, I guess that's what it's called. Logical to me.
Well, that's what the city of Austin
Okay,
reference ordinance is when you define the tent.
got it.
And that's only in a certain area
So, thank you.
close to town.
Okay. Any other questions of Jeff? Yeah.
Hi, Wendy Hendley, 401 Vale Street. I apologize, I'm going to leave after I make some comments. I'm not contagious, I just have the end of a cold, in case anyone's wondering. If I'm hacking, I'm like past the contagion, okay, for your security. I have a lot of questions about FAR, and I'm trying to understand and trying to catch up with the work that you've done. So I appreciate all of the time and effort that y'all are putting into like thinking about different ways to look at our residential code. I think one of my first comments is, and I've talked to a couple people on the task force, is I'm not sure how we got here, like where we're looking at the size and scale of houses. When we're a comprehensive residential code review task force, and this hasn't even been kind of given out to the community as like, is this a problem? Clearly it is a problem for some people, but for some people it may not be something that they want to tackle. And so I do think that one of the first things that you should do is seek what your community wants done, because we're tackling a problem that we don't even know if this is a problem for most of the people in our community. One of the things that I thought of just thinking through this is that this FAR would be a detrimental thing to somebody with a small lot. It would be, you can only build this size of house on your lot because it's this size. And what it may do with the unintended consequence could be, especially for people who are affluent in Rollingwood, is that people will want to get bigger lots. And we're going to start seeing people collect more than one lot so that they can build bigger houses. And so we're going to start going into the estate lot territory, which is something that we've had discussions about in the past. And also, if you can't afford to buy a second lot or a third lot, then you can't plat your lot to do whatever you want on your lot. So I think this could kind of lean the other way and getting kind of larger lots with larger houses, because you could plat two lots together and build on an acre and build a really big house. And a lot of people have the means to do that, if they had to do it because of the restrictions. The other thing that I would say is, I'm not really sure the data that we're getting from TCAT on HVAC square footage, and square footage is gonna get us where we need to be for the FAR. And I'm looking at my own house and how it's calculated for my house, because we just built a house recently. And I've been told my house is not a problem house, but I am in the 35% range, I believe, somewhere around there. But I really think that I should be in a bigger range than that, because I have a big outdoor covered porch and a pool and a covered area in my front yard. And so I think it will depend on how you interpret those things, but if you have this tent or box, is it going to prohibit people from building like structures for outdoor living areas and whatnot? And so I don't think it's clearly defined by what you're finding in TCAD, because TCAD's just showing you the HVAC in a lot of situations, or maybe it's showing more things in HVACs and I'm misunderstanding. So anyhow, I appreciate that we're having the conversation. I just ask that you would go and get some community input and ask the community what they want, and then let us all be a part of this process and make it a process. If they went over it for a whole year in the past and they chunked it out the window, there must have been a reason for it. So I think that we should have the same sort of discussion and process in the present day. So thank you for all your work on it.
Thank you, Wendy. And I assure you, we're gonna do a survey, and we're gonna have a number of public meetings that, to make sure this is more for informational deals of what we have to do.
Well, and we have gotten
Oh, yeah, we're
numerous
getting- we're
emails
getting
and
a lot.
yeah, it's
Getting,
not been, and
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not a void.
people have been invited to every meeting, so.
So,
And Wendy, I think it's critical too to make sure we know what the definition of gross square footage is. Okay? It could be a lot of things.
Yeah, and I would agree with the point about smaller lots. So I would recommend this be applied to lots exceeding a certain level. And
I think we have, the smallest lots we have generally are 1/3 of an acre by regulation. However, there is one lot that is half that size.
I had to throw out the data across Bee Caves Road for.
Yeah, I'm not gonna count.
I had to throw that data out,
Yeah.
but there were a few smaller lots that
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
tipped the scale.
Yeah.
That I don't think that was the spirit of what we were talking about with the really small lots. So I agree with that point.
Yeah.
And then the TCAD data, I agree as well. Like we'd have to do, like this was a quick little brainstorming exercise. We'd have to do, if we're going to put this into code, we have to have a city conversation around how do we define it, right? This is
Yeah.
just something quick and dirty that I did. This wasn't intended to be applied in code the way that I presented it. So I agree with that as well.
It's excellent work, though. Thank you. Okay, yeah, Shanti.
I think it relates to what we're trying to do. As always, I dig through my history files. Oh, sorry. Shanti Jayakumar, 3309 Park Hills Drive. So in 1988, the city put out a little handbook, a little blue book, in which they had a diagram. Okay, I've made some copies for y'all. And it talks about zoning. And one of the things that was very interesting, zoning promotes harmony in the physical environment by segregating the different types of uses like residential and commercial into their own districts, and by imposing aesthetic requirements to improve the appearance of the community. Zoning also facilitates an orderly community by preventing overcrowding and traffic congestion, and by creating proper relationships between lots and homes. I don't think any of this grows old with time. The same essence of what they're trying to say here prevails today. Among all of the various city requirements, zoning is among the most important, and it says its enforcement, however, is dependent upon cooperation by residents and city officials alike. In turn, this translates into voluntary compliance by individual landowners, reports of violations by citizens and municipal personnel, and vigorous enforcement by the city. Many zoning violations are the result of lack of knowledge rather than deliberate intent. Some of the more common residential zoning violations relate to a front yard fence must be located behind the front building setback line or building foundation line, whichever is more restrictive. Accessory structures like tool sheds and others are permitted not in the front yards. They must be located in a side or backyard. And then here's a very important statement. On a corner lot, no vegetation or structure over 36 inches high is allowed to be placed or maintained within 15 feet of the intersection of the two streets right-of-way lines or within 10 feet of the front lot line. And finally, a 30-foot green belt is required as a buffer between the residential and the commercial. This diagram is very nicely put together with how you can set your house on a lot. And I looked at the TCAD data where it's not a very clear picture, but it shows the location of each of the houses, how they were situated on the lot. And some of them might have changed, but what I have here shows how people were really cognizant of keeping the setbacks as prescribed by our code. I don't know when anything changed. And then we have on the city website the FAQs, which also have setback lines for rear setbacks, front setbacks, side setbacks. And I wonder if that's also something that needs to be pursued in in conjunction with height, as well as what can go into a setback or not. And I think there's a lot between the paper and what's going on in the city, as we can all see. And I was wanting to bring that up for you all to look at as far as setbacks are concerned and what goes into the setbacks, so that we can have, I think you made a comment, Duke, in one of the your inputs, that we should keep a 25-foot between houses. We had 10 feet on one side and 15 on the other side, with a total of 25 feet. And therefore our homes are, you can see between the houses. That's not happening anymore. I don't know why, but I think something that you might want to consider re-looking at, that we have 25 feet between. I don't know if it'll happen or not, but I just saw your comment in one of the letters, so I thought I'd bring it up.
It's in the code now.
Okay. Anyway, you guys are going to talk about it, but I wanted to bring it up as something we have followed over the last 50 years. So I'll give you all this.
Thank you, Shanti.
You're welcome.
Desiree, do we have,
Can I-
Thank
we
you.
have
Oh, yes,
people on
please.
Zoom?
Absolutely, thank you.
No comments on Zoom, no.
But you would know if they
Yes.
did. Okay, that's all of them. Okay, yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Kendra Rollison. I am homeowner at 304 Vale Street, and I think I'll be a little bit of a voice of opposition here, but my husband and I moved to Rollingwood from Zilker primarily for the purpose of being able to build a home that we felt would be large enough for our family. Both my husband and I are full-time professionals, so to have 2 offices, we have 3 kids, enough space. I personally think the 35% FAR is low, and from other families that I've spoken with, I think based on the data, it shows that larger homes are being built. A lot more families have moved into the neighborhood in the last 5 to 7 years, and so my preference would be to implement a FAR but have it at a slightly higher percentage. Based on my current lot, a 35% FAR would have not really gotten us the house that we wanted to have with the space that we needed for ourselves and our children. So just something to think about.
Great.
Is there a number that you could think of now, or we'll come back to that?
I don't
another
know,
point?
looking more into FAR and the City of Austin regulations and all of the exemptions they have, related to not counting stairwell space and attic space and things like that. Really, they're counting solely usable conditioned square footage. I just don't think right now we have the data available, and I don't know if we ever will, to see, exactly where the houses fall within Rollingwood. I don't even have that detail in my plans as far as taking out what at least the City of Austin exempts to figure out what my current lot FAR would be. I think something higher than 35%, lower than 50%, and those are just like gut percentage reactions.
Where did you hear 35%?
It was just the arbitrary number that I picked in the presentation, but
Yeah.
I wasn't proposing 35.
Okay,
Just to be clear.
yeah.
Yep.
All right, then
We definitely don't have a number, and that's
Yeah.
it's great to get feedback.
Yeah,
'cause
That's what we're looking
says-
for, is
Yeah.
public conversation around what we
Yeah.
think the number should be. But yeah.
Right. And then I think the second thing, and I haven't fully revisited the code to figure out exactly what it says about legal nonconforming structures, but I think people in my situation who are building homes right now, obviously a self-interested concern is what happens if my home burns down or there's a, over 50% type of casualty situation. I think under the current code it says if it's more, and don't quote me on this, but I think it says if it's more than 50%, then you can't rebuild to the structure that was there before. You then have to rebuild in accordance with the code that's in place at that time. Is that wrong, Brooke?
The 50% is a voluntary construction, a voluntary change.
she's gonna need you to get
We'll
up there.
defer to our other lawyer.
I believe that the 50% rule applies when the change is a voluntary change by the homeowner, as opposed to a natural disaster or fire or other involuntary destruction where you can rebuild the home that you've had. So,
Okay. Yeah, so my concern was, it sounds like it might already be handled within the code, but essentially that if there was some kind of casualty at the property, that people would have the ability to rebuild what was there before rather than having to scrape their lot and start over in accordance with the code in place at that time.
I think that issue's been raised. I know we've gotten some comments on that issue. And I think that's something that the city needs to address as we go through this, to make sure that everybody feels comfortable about what they can do and can't do as things go on that. Hopefully we won't have any casualties.
I know,
like that.
yeah,
We
fingers
don't-
crossed.
We haven't had one in a long time like that in Rollingwood,
I have a question.
right?
If you don't, and I'm putting you on the spot, so if you want to not answer now and think about it and email us, that's
Sure.
fine too. But one of the things that I think is going to be critically important that I think this committee has not done in any way, shape, or form is talk to people who are in the building process or have just built, and see what their frustrations are and see how they think that it could have been done better if the rules had been different, to see whether they could have built a structure that may have been less imposing if they had different rules to do so. So I would really appreciate if you had any time to put thought into that, if there were things that the current code forced you to do in some ways to build a house that maybe you wouldn't have wanted to build, or maybe you would have wanted to do it differently. And one of the things that has been brought up to me, and again, I don't know, speak to it if you want to, or if you don't want to, is this idea that we don't allow, the rules generally don't allow cutting into a hill. And for a home like mine, which is dramatically affected by a hill, I could probably have more flexibility to build in a way that's less imposing on my neighbors if I could shape the land that's beneath my house. And I don't understand why the land that's beneath my subfloor affects drainage, because that's my understanding that this isn't the drainage ordinance. So I wondered if you had any thoughts on that. And if you don't now, that's fine.
Yeah, I think your first question, really the only thing that comes to mind is the, I forget what it's called in our code, but effectively the detached unit that you could potentially build in the back of your lot. It has to be 500 square feet or less, I believe. Accessory building. Potentially, we probably would have had sort of like an office situation out there rather than inside of our house, but to us, it wasn't a big thing. I think our largest building challenge related to our lot sloping toward the street, and we actually kept our house at the same elevation, the same grade elevation that the prior house was at, but because we pulled it forward to the 30-foot setback, it looks a lot taller than it used to be, when in reality it's not. And going around the neighborhood, there aren't that many front sloping lots, but there are some. There's one on the corner of Wallace and Rockaway Cove that it looks like it was built some time ago, and they did a similar thing where they have a pretty steep foundation. And so I know the slope issue is something you all will talk about later, but I think for front sloping lots, it would be hard to terrace a home in the same way as you could terrace a home for a back or side sloping. And so for us, that was one of the biggest challenges, in addition to just, we did explore what would it look like if we utilize the area from the natural grade to where we were going to start our foundation, and just the added expense of, instead of just using that as foundation, but putting like a real structure, kind of a half basement in there, was cost prohibitive in our case. And so that's why we had to build our house at the way that we did.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Welcome to Rollingwood. Any other questions? Jeff, thank you. That
Thank
was
you.
excellent, I thought. So AI was involved in
Yeah, I actually have a question about that. I emailed the city with a request. Sean, the guy who I worked with, asked if I could write a joint newsletter about the experience with him, and he said Ashley recommended I discuss with the CRCRC for approval on that. I just want to do everything over the table, make sure.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
I certainly don't, are there any, Ryan, do you have an issue?
I don't personally, but it's not on the agenda, so I
Oh,
don't think we should be taking
okay, you're right.
action that's not on the agenda.
I'll make sure, Jeff. if
Ashley
you need-
recommended it, so you discuss now. Yeah.
Oh,
Just-
it's
just-
just in his analysis?
I mean, it's public information that's been
Exactly.
printed. Just-
Making sure.
I just don't want to make a deliberation on
Yeah.
something that is not on the agenda. So
Fair
I'm not
enough.
going
I
to-
got you. Okay,
Just for information purposes, City of Austin, the McMansion ordinance, it's 40% FAR. But then the gross square footage includes covered porches, not at the ground level, but at upper levels, and also includes covered or carports. There's certain exceptions in there, but it doesn't include attic spaces that meet certain requirements, and any, so to speak, basement area is not included also. So again, like the comment to Wendy was, we need to come up with a good definition of what we think falls under gross square footage.
and Ryan, I appreciate your comment about, let's get the builder, because some of the design issues we may be having is because of our code. I hate to think of that, but I'd like to cover that base. I've asked at least one person who's actually finishing his house across the street from me now to come do that, to give us a synopsis of what he went through on doing that. He's not quite finished. He's trying to get moved in, so I'm probably not going to get him to do it until he finishes and brings everything in. So I think he's got Thursday, he's getting his permits. Very good. Any other questions? Listen, thank you. Excellent. It's a good start for us to know where we're going to be to do that. I have to ask, does everybody here have a good understanding about what we're talking about at FAR, the floor to area ratio? I just want to make sure that got that.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
So you're referencing you're not allowed, if there's a slope, you're not allowed to build from the entry level. Is that a rule?
No, the inquiry that has been brought up to me recently is that perhaps, so generally it's my understanding, again, this is brand new to me, that the drainage ordinance that we have doesn't allow you to cut into a hill. Essentially, you have to put anything on top. Well, theoretically, there might be a circumstance where cutting into a hill might lower the elevation and lower the imposition that a home has on other people. And so that's an example where, and what I meant by, and I saw you gave me a face, what I meant by, I don't understand what land under concrete has to do with drainage.
Yeah.
So if my house is on concrete, why does it matter whether the hill is flat underneath it? How does that affect drainage if my house is concrete on top of it?
No, the reason I responded as I did was because I'm all about impervious cover, as I already indicated.
Right.
And your house is impervious cover.
That's exactly my point.
When you said that, I immediately was like, wait a minute, that's the whole point here.
So that's my point, is that it's already impervious. So why do we have a drainage rule that prevents us from cutting into it? If cutting into it could in fact lower the things that people are so worried about. And I think, go ahead.
And what
Sure.
about the antithesis of that, where you take a
Can you
sloping
speak
lot
into the mic, please?
and build a
Sandy. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. Sandy Keller, 307 Inwood. The opposite of that, where you have a sloping lot, you decide to backfill. You build a retaining wall, you backfill, and raise the height of everything. And, that to me seems to be an even greater issue.
Right, and I think that would change the way that water flows on the lot. right?
Yes, I
Right?
concur.
I don't disagree with that, but I'm not certain how cutting into a lot where you're going to build a house anyway. So there's already going to be something that is blocking the water. How that negatively affects drainage.
Okay, yes, and I'm inclined to agree with you on that. I was just confused because when you were citing the space under your house, to me, that's the point of this. Any kind of impervious cover increases runoff. So that was
Right.
my
And
place.
I'm not proposing, or I'm not proposing anything, but I'm certainly not suggesting that we're better off if we have more concrete in a wider area. What I'm suggesting is if our rules allow concrete in a certain area, that it doesn't make sense to restrict what we can do underneath our house in that exact same area. In fact, if people wanted basements, I'd be all for it, because it doesn't affect anybody. It increases square footage. It doesn't impose on your neighbors.
As long as you're going down, not building up.
That's right.
Yeah.
May I
Thank
make
you,
a
Anna.
comment?
Yes, Wendy?
Okay, I'm
please.
sorry, I had to run out to go pick up my daughter from tennis lessons and I was 9 minutes late. Whoops. Well, since we were talking about impervious cover,
She's going to watch your
oh,
name.
Just your name again.
Just
can you
your
hear me?
name.
Oh, Wendy Huntley, 401 Vale Street. I wanted to talk a little bit about the impervious cover and drainage, since y'all were talking about it. Just having built a home in Rollingwood, we had a 1950 original owner house that was built. We built in the exact same footprint of the house, and we added a garage and an outdoor patio. The impervious cover on the home, because you're required to do this when you build in your site plan, you're required to get the before and after impervious cover, so it'd be a really interesting exercise to get on all of our building permits. The impervious cover before on our home, I believe, was 29% calculation, and after, because we collect 100% of our rainwater, it's 19%. But the home was 2,500 square feet, and now with our HVAC and our outdoor porch, we're like 7,000 square feet, and we have less drainage that's coming off of our lot. So I wanted to kind of put that out there that, you know, the houses maybe that are causing more problems with our drainage infrastructure might be the houses that have no drainage infrastructure because they were built before we had TCEQ, which makes you collect your your drainage water. And then the other comment that I forgot to make when I was up here earlier is we've had these conversations going on in Rollingwood forever. You know, we have a system right now that incentivizes a developer to come in and build lot line to lot line to lot line to lot line so they can maximize their profit. We know that a lot of developers have come in and have done that. Some developers are really good and they haven't done that, and they've built to the neighborhood. People who are going to live here haven't done that. Some of the conversations that we've had, though, that have never gone anywhere are there other ways of addressing these things? Like, why is it incentivizing them to go lot line to lot line? What other things could you do to preserve green space? Is the FAR going to get us there? Because you're just going to make people build a smaller house. But there are other things that people want. They want to have accessory buildings, some that have 2 floors, some that they can have a bathroom and a kitchenette. Maybe they want their mother-in-law to live with them. Maybe they want a guest house. Maybe they want a pool house. If you're able as a developer to build something without it having to be attached to the house to get that square footage, would you then preserve some green space in the middle of that? Would you then have developed the lot differently? And I think I've talked to some developers who have developed a lot fully that would have probably done some things differently if they had been allowed to develop the lot differently. And so I don't think that just decreasing the size of a home that someone can build is an answer, because I think that kind of takes away from our options as what we do, what we want to do with smart architecture in Rollingwood. And the other thing that I wanted to say, and some people may disagree with me, but I think I've already built my house. I have already developed my lot. So I am not going to be hurt by the laws if they change, because my home is wonderful and it's developed and I was able to build what I want. But I have a lot of people that I know in this neighborhood, a lot of friends, a lot of people that I care about who have not had the opportunity to develop their lot. And I think when you have a lot size and people are willing to pay in the millions, some up to $4 million, to tear down a house, to build a new house there, when you start restricting what people can do and build on their lots, they are not going to pay $4 million for that lot value anymore. So people might not agree with me, but I think that personally, my opinion is that if you force people to build smaller houses, it will impact our property values, each and every one of us, and it will impact people not wanting to come in and because they can't build what they want. Because the reason that people have built here is because you can build a larger house, and a lot of people do want larger family homes, and that seems to be what happens if a house hasn't been developed in 10 to 20 years. What you see happening is people will buy that house and tear it down and build a larger family home. So I think there are people who want larger homes, and so I think we should have that voice in there as well.
Thank you, Wendy. And I have to tell you, Wendy, Rolling Wood traditionally has tried to balance those two things.
Yes.
As we've gone through.
As I know.
And thank you both for talking about the accessory dwelling. To me, and this is just me being on my high horse, I guess, is that I just think we have to look at way more. We have to be looking at everything. We should be taking a very comprehensive look at everything. And I'm not remotely ready to jump to a solution right now because I'm not even sure what the problem is yet.
Sorry, this is Ricky Joshi. You probably already said what I was going to say, but I personally feel that to reiterate my first point, I think it's height and imposition of some of these homes. From my personal perspective, the house going up next to me is actually 7,000 square feet. I mean, that actually doesn't, I don't think that's a problem, unless it was an impervious cover problem. It's more along the lines of, height and how close height is built to the street, particularly in some of these, and again, I mentioned that Park Hills, when you start getting into 4-story buildings right next to the road, that's where I start to see homes that don't look like anywhere else in any nice neighborhood, whether it's Dallas, Houston, Columbus, Ohio, or the rest of Austin. That's it.
Tom, I'd love to do my presentation because it addresses a lot of these things,
Yes,
and I think maybe people will understand
Right.
kind of what we're doing.
Let me make sure we don't have any other
Okay. I mean,
questions.
they can ask questions even
Great.
later.
Let's go ahead to, Alex, let's go ahead to item number 8, because I think Duke was going to have to leave here shortly.
Yeah, that's not at the top.
And you want this first one?
Yeah, but that's not the first page, but I need to talk a little bit first. Okay. I am can y'all hear me? I'm going to do a deep dive on height. That's kind of what I focused on. And I have notes so that I don't miss things or ramble. And you can stop me and discuss, but I have a lot to get through, and we can circle back on any thoughts you have after this. So I plan to show you data from other cities, an analysis of our own codes and built environment, focusing on the impacts, and finally some pretty pictures of positive trends in Rollingwood that I think the gentleman was hoping to see pictures. I will not show you houses that have been viewed critically or call anyone's home out in a negative way. So, and before I get started, I need to share some points just so you know how we're thinking about this more broadly. It is comprehensive. It's my intent to gather data and speak impartially, but I also have to do this through the lens of being a homeowner and an architect, as I know Duke also shares. And Duke has a long history of building homes and probably has even more to say about it all with more credibility. So, part of being comprehensive is looking at the existing and proposed data, rules in other cities, and gathering public input. 3 people out of 34 responses so far have asked us to, quote, do nothing. 28 of 34 have said to move either slow or fast, with the implication that they might be open to some modifications. We can clean these things up in a survey because, for instance, the question about reducing the height may mean different things to different people, like reduce the height allowance from 35 to 45 feet, but keep the 35 feet overall, or reduce it to 30 feet. We just don't know for sure yet. Only 2 people have said don't reduce the height, but 13 said yes, and 19 were no answer. I've gone through and read every email and tried to look at all the homes raised as concerns, and also analyze what we currently have in our city, including active and pending permits. In general, the houses of concern tend to mostly be developer spec homes. Some have elicited complaints I do not find objectionable in the design, but I can empathize with neighbors who have lost trees or privacy and some sunlight and now look into other homes and vice versa. Those are hard to remedy. I also feel very strongly that when residents write their emails, they paint a picture of what is important to them, which goes well beyond just their home: community, landscape, children, park, privacy, access, quality of life, to be heard by their government, etc. In general, and this does not apply to all, but some of these developers do not have that checklist. They have a pretty they're one-dimensional about their goal in Rollingwood, and residents are left feeling like they lost a number of things of their list of values. Only a few custom homes are causing comments or concerns. There may be aspects where the rules were being pushed more than the normal trend, but by and large, all the custom homes are really beautiful and thoughtful and the type that should hold their value, and that is a community asset overall. I think the wide variety of styles and materials is fun to see. Rollingwood is not about design uniformity or historic districts, but welcomes unique solutions. We on this committee are not at all opposed to big houses or to small houses, if there is such a thing anymore. But one issue that has come up, as Jeff has shown, is whether the house volume fits the lot. Something I'm not sure that people realize, and maybe I didn't until I really started looking at this, is that there are a high percentage of new custom homes that are mostly or even fully single story. I encourage you to go look, because there's a lot, and it really surprised me to see that. Or they give the appearance of a single story from the street while taking advantage of the slope or below grade access. Sorry. They are great examples of how scale can be used in context to highlight taking advantage of the slope or below grade access, or the best features of the site, while still packing in homeowners' programs without overbuilding. There are also a very high percentage of 1 and 1.5 stories in Rollingwood that still look happily lived in and are not tear down status. So mid-century modern architect A.D. Stenger homes populate our border with Westlake, and whether you know of them or like them or not is not the issue, but it is a consideration that they are part of a broader context with some influences along Timberline Drive near Inwood, where there are a series of older stone homes that step up a very steep hillside in a very pleasing way, in my opinion. What is significant to me here is that given current rules that allow the building of very large homes, people are choosing to use their square feet more purposefully and not building out all that they can. People generally choose quality over quantity. What I don't think we want is for people to feel they have to overbuild to keep the property value in their home or to regain views and sunlight they lost when a neighbor built something very large next to them or might build in the future, since we don't have any protections or restrictions along the setbacks in our code, and I will get to that. Regarding noncompliance, most homes are probably okay under a sliding 35-foot height rule or terracing concept that I will also explain. Homes built before our tree and drainage ordinances were in place would also be considered non-compliant, but no one is talking about that. If you are planning or already in the process of creating a set of drawings to build, and you're concerned that you might not be able to do what you're planning, please bring your plans to us to discuss the issues so that we can understand what we need to be thinking about, which is what we were talking about, and I had that in my notes as well. So I feel that we're looking at these rules mostly to see if we can make subtle adjustments to ease residents' concerns while not punishing the majority of residents with plans to build thoughtful custom homes. For me, going through this process is a real reminder that we are a community. So when you build a home, it isn't just about your hopes and dreams, but your home has good and bad impacts on those around you, and it's something we all have to live with, and we don't all agree on what is good or what is bad. So, to the presentation. Thanks for listening. The first thing I did was look at some other cities, and there are a lot, and it's comprehensive and complex, and I can't analyze all of it in great detail. I can't even read that from here, so I'm going to pull up my thing. This is from the American Planning Association, which I thought Shanti might appreciate. It's the sort of historic precedent to some of this. So this is a very old document, and it still circulates. You'll still find language in recent cities that are looking at this and using this. And I pulled out the things that might apply to Rollingwood. Height regulations have these principal purposes. So we're talking about height. Protection of view, protection of the character of the neighborhood, protection of light and air. Their biggest concern is side yards and adjacent lots, which people are bringing up. And they recommend that height here should be kept low. And again, that's not something that Rollingwood regulates. We don't talk about what happens down the side setback with your neighbor. So to vary the pattern, height at edges of buildable areas, light plane, or maximum height over any portion of the lot could be changed. As an added refinement, length of building might be considered in setting side yard requirements. We could potentially limit the eave height of side yards and or the length that an elevation may extend at the maximum allowable height. So in talking about if a builder comes in and wants to build, you know, the full footprint, if we had some, you know, protection for the people around them, I think that that might be good. So we want to encourage variety along the sides, projections, insets, material changes along the side elevation so that you're not staring at a large flat wall, especially if it is light colored and highly reflective. Oh, I can't. Austin has a very complex just talking about the tent, and there's just pages of tents, and I did not spend a lot of time trying to analyze all of their tents, because I do think that, you know, I think that that's going to be a problem in Rollingwood if we spend a bunch of time talking about tents. And so I think we need to find subtle changes and not comprehensive changes like that. So in Austin, they're, you know, 32 feet. If they're outside the floodplain, 35 feet is their max height in the floodplain. Another thing that I've been looking at is how do we find a reference datum to measure height? And I'll get into our code. But in Austin, height shall be the lower of natural grade or finished grade and measured vertically from the average of the highest and lowest grades adjacent to the building. So flat roof is to the coping, mansard to the deck line, and so on. And for a stepped or terrace building, the height of each segment is determined individually. And as I mentioned, the tent. So Bellevue, Washington is interesting. They use an average existing grade as reference datum determined by taking point elevations every 10 feet, which I think yields a pretty comprehensive idea and picture of what your site looks like when you're really going around it. Their allowable building height is 35 feet. They allow a flat roof to go to 35 feet. From our perspective and for what we're hearing, that has a lot of impacts, but that could be mitigated by some eave height restrictions. Or flat roofs that represent a very small percentage of the overall, as in a tower. Maybe we can allow a tower element to reach max height with, you know, a flat roof, but not the whole side setback. Sorry. I didn't change the page. Okay, so that's Bellevue, and that's how they measure, and that's measure height and how they grab point data around the site plan. Tacoma, Washington. And this is kind of getting into something that I also think could be useful here. Basically, they take the existing grade and they create a parallel datum line at their max building height, and I'm kind of calling this a sliding scale or a terrace, and I'll show you some examples, but that you might have a house that if you measured the low point and the high point, there might be 45 feet of change, but they never overlap because they're going up and down with the scale of the lot. Marin County does just that, just showing it as an example. These are, you know, California, Washington, a lot of neighborhoods on steeply sloping lots, seems to have some relevance. So grade is defined as the ground elevation used as the basis for measurement of allowed structure height, where grade is the elevation of the natural or finished grade at the exterior surface of the structure, whichever is more restrictive. And that too, I think, is important because we end up taking our reference data point from something that vanishes often and that can be heavily changed, and so it kind of becomes meaningless. So, oh, there was, I think, San Luis Obispo. They do something interesting. They add setback. They add 1 foot of setback to every additional foot of height that you want to add above 35 feet. That's just another consideration. So if you want to have 45 feet, you have to add 10 feet of setback. So seems like maybe an interesting thing to consider. The other thing they do is they take account for the fact that maybe there's a lot of houses in Rollingwood that are kind of below street level. They might even be below their neighbors for some reason. But maybe you shouldn't be penalized for that. If you just want to raise your house up to the level of everybody else around you, that you can kind of reset what your reference datum is, I think is kind of worth considering. And this is kind of to Kendra's point, this is, when you have upslope and downslope, and how do you address that, and lots of complicated computations for that. And I'm going to go to the next presentation, which is, okay. That's it, yep. Okay, so, I've kind of gone over this a little bit, just in terms of context. We still have a very high percentage of 1-story and 1.5-story homes in Rollingwood. Those are the ones where they've built into the attic, or they have like a subterranean carport or garage or basement, but there's a lot of these. There's also a high percentage of new custom homes that are 1-story. I'm not advocating 1-story. I'm just giving context. New custom homes that are 2-story often don't build to the maximum allowable height or fully encompass the first floor. So I've gone through all the permits, I've looked at all of these things. I've looked at historic stuff as well, as much as I can. And there really is a high percentage that don't necessarily need to max out. But a fully 2-story and the introduction of 3- and 4-story is relatively new and an increasing trend, but still not the norm. But of the acting and pending permits, 4 of 9 pending permits are for homes that exceed 35 feet for a significant portion of the overall, but 2 have been flagged and are in review. Of the acting permits, 19 of 30, which is 63% of new homes, are in excess of 35 feet for a portion of the overall building. Sometimes it's a significant portion, sometimes it's, half the house. But, and like I said, I can't collect data on the heights of older homes in Rollingwood just from observing from the street. I mean, there's some that you can't even see, and I think that's worth noting. Like, if you can't see it, is it an impact? And I'm not going to go to the vault and look at really old plans. So, but I do see over the last 10 years that I can account for maybe 2 houses that are 3 or 4 stories for a significant percentage, and about 9 that appear to be between 35 and 45. Okay, so our rule, our code here, I'm going to just put it here so everybody can see it again. It has made my brain leak out of my ears trying to read this thing and understand it and make sense of it, and I still didn't quite grasp it until really this weekend. What I was seeing in the plans didn't match what I thought I was reading in the definition. And when we first started, and you said, we might just throw this whole thing out, and I shrieked. I was like, you can't say that. But until I've looked at it and thought about it and tried to understand it, I'm like, okay, maybe this doesn't work for us, and I'll explain why. But the very first thing it says, no portion of any building or structure may exceed 35 feet in height. And I know this has been brought up in council meetings. And then the definition, if you don't know it already, basically Building height residential means the vertical distance above a reference datum measured to the highest point of the building. The reference datum shall be selected by either of the following, whichever yields a greater height of the building. An elevation, number one, an elevation of the highest adjoining original native ground surface within a 5-foot horizontal distance of the exterior wall of the building when such original native ground surface is not more than 10 feet above the lowest grade. So the presumption here is that you can only build a 35-foot house, period. And I think that most people think that, but it's not true. Number two, an elevation of 10 feet higher than the lowest grade when the original native ground surface, described in section 1, is more than 10 feet above the lowest grade. So you either have to start at the top, if you don't have 10 feet of change with your low point, or you have to start at the bottom and build up, if you do have 10 feet or more. And what's interesting about that is everybody's called starting at the bottom a 10-foot bonus, but it's not, because if you start at 10 feet and you build up another, you get 10, I'm sorry, you start below grade, you add 10 feet, and you add another 35 feet, you're still gonna be lower than if you started over here at the high point and built up. I don't know if anybody has realized that.
But it's,
So,
it's
it's
one
not-
of the two options. You don't
Yeah.
get to choose.
Okay,
So-
no, you don't, but here are the issues to me. Section 10771 seems to be in conflict with section 107.3 regarding maximum permissible height. Should we be enforcing maximum permissible height? Maximum building height. Should it overlay the definitions instead of the other way around? Because as I understand it, the definitions supersede the maximum permissible height language. Maybe the maximum permissible height should supersede definitions. That's one option. The definition of what is an exterior wall is unclear. Does it include terraces, porches, columns, or must it be conditioned space? The newly revised definition of lowest original native ground surface could be qualified with adjoining the exterior wall of the building for both definitions, because I don't think it's clear where it is. And there's been some speculation that the lowest point of a lot, or the lowest point in that definition is actually of the entire lot outside of the buildable area. And so I think there's some things that just still need to be cleaned up, and I know council's trying to work on this. So it turns out you can use definition 1 to build from 35 to 45 feet. I'm sorry, 44 feet, depending on the slope. You can use definition 2 to build up to 45 feet. And if you look at the graphic, what I'm showing is on the left, your reference datum is on the left, and you only have 9 feet of change at a maximum. Well, you can still build up to 44 feet with definition 1. And I don't think that they've been counting the foundation in all of the reviews, and that surprised me. I kept thinking, how is somebody being allowed to build this when they don't have an overall 10 foot of change? And it's because the foundation doesn't count. So we're really not enforcing our 35-foot rule. So there's little difference between definition 1 and 2 unless you have very little change on your very little slope, and no clarity on how to enforce the 35-foot height requirement. So if they are both so similar, one new rule could be chosen for both. And I skipped a part. There should be no step function. And that's a term from my husband. That's not a term I use at work. That's a term he uses at work, step function. I had to ask him what he meant. But there should not be a step function that allows you to choose number 1 or number 2, because that creates an incentive to game the system in order to get whichever is more preferable. And that's where we are. The spirit of the rule is not being followed, and a statement to the intent of the rule could be considered in an effort to craft new wording that matches the spirit of the rule in the first place. For instance, trying to help those with steeply sloping lots, especially those that face a green belt and not a neighbor, or are impacted by excessive drainage issues, and define steep by either grade and or location as in a zoning district. So that's just one suggestion we're tossing out, that we might have limited areas around Rollingwood, like where Ryan's lot is, where he faces a green belt and, you know, there's just trees, nobody's there, and it's steep. It's genuinely steep. It's not just almost steep. And I think that there's some, like on the lower end of Riley before you get to Stratford on the west side, you know, there's a number of these pockets around Rollingwood. And if people are concerned that they might, you know, lose the ability to develop a lot in the way that they want, and they don't want to have to go before the Board of Adjustment, we might be able to kind of collect them into this, and they still have to meet certain criteria. It's not, you know, that old rules apply, but that they have some leniency. So, moving on. That is an example of kind of the maximum of what you could do under our current rules. And I'm showing kind of real plate heights to show that, you know, you can have 12-foot ceilings, 14-foot, you know, you can get a lot of house in that area if you built out the entire volume. There's just some additional volumetric examples of kind of things that have been happening. But a property may be generally flat, except for a portion on the perimeter, which can allow for greater building height overall. This height difference can have implications for neighbors on 3 sides and across the street. Measuring the reference datum point before site development is meaningless if the lot is then graded flat, which I mentioned. The reference datum could be the highest survey point before or after construction, whichever measurement is lower. And I think that that is something that should really be considered, that we need to find a survey point that's meaningful and not manipulated. A property can build a volumetric 45-foot box while an adjacent neighbor on a flatter lot at nearly the same elevation can only build a volumetric 35-foot box. Another reason step function is incompatible with our conditions. So on this kind of little hypothetical, you would have, you know, the red point represents your high point, and so you can select your reference datum from there, even though if you look at the topo lines, that's really a pretty flat lot. And so what happens is, in the image at the top, and even though you said you could build down and it won't have impacts, you can actually build up. And so overlaying that blue hypothetical house is an orange outline of a 35-foot tall, kind of typical Rollingwood 2-story house. And then below that is a red outline of a typical Rollingwood 1-story house. So if you live next door to that and they have flattened their lot, that's what your view now looks like. And if you had a 2-story house like the orange outline next to you, well, that wasn't so bad, but suddenly your landscape looks pretty different. And then in the, let's see, in the next image for 1-story homes upslope that had sunlight and views over an existing 1 or 2-story home before, they may be impacted by 3 and 4 stories. Even though they're upslope, they might have been looking out at something nice, but they could have looked over the 2-story house, but now they're looking right into that house. And that's showing even, you know, that's a 20-foot rear setback. And older homes tended to not build to their setback, so they might be back 25 feet. It's kind of how I'm representing that. And again, there's no accounting for side setback impacts in our code. There are no eave height requirements, which allow for a structure that looms over an adjacent property within 20 feet at a minimum, because if you have 2 10-foot setbacks, 30 feet at a maximum if you happen to have 2 15-foot setbacks. And you can see in that bottom image, and there are a number of recent examples of this in Rollingwood. And homes can be impacted downslope as well as upslope. So there's an example of an existing 1-story home. It has a 10-foot side setback. The new house has a 10-foot side setback. And that's a pretty dramatic landscape view out there. So it helps to mitigate the impact with a sloping roof. So I took that same volume and I cut it back. Well, that gets a little better. Homes that have side entry garages reduce the impact by virtue of the 5-foot driveway setback plus a minimum of 25 to 30 feet backing out distance. Also beneficial if the side elevation is narrow and the highest point is literally a point and not a square or rectangle. So in that middle image, I've pulled the house back because they have a side entry garage. So that gets off that neighbor a lot. And then the yellow end view there is maybe what the side of that house looks like. So, well, that's not so bad. It's not a house that's taking up the whole thing. It's tall, but, you know, it could be worse, like the image at the bottom. So it starts to feel much different as the volume runs the length of the setback, especially if it is upslope. Impacts can also be experienced from across the street, either upslope or downslope. And nobody talks about across the street, but it's true. Where views were of trees, hillsides, or even downtown and may impact access to sunlight, but now stare at a large wall of a house. So reducing the length of a 2-story volume to 2/3 the length of the side setback also mitigates the impacts. So, you know, the yellow outline is a 2-story house, and it's slightly upslope, and then it drops at the back down to a 1-story, and a tall one at that, but, you know, it's still better than if it runs the whole length. Homes that have partial basements or garages also reduce visible impacts. The home at the bottom there is an example of what I'm calling terracing, where no portion of a home exceeds 35 feet above grade. So if you took a sliding scale, you know, you could have a home like this that doesn't ever go above 35 feet. And then, oops, sorry. Finally, this is my happy, eclectic, hypothetical terraced neighborhood. Some of these may look vaguely familiar, but I assure you they're not. So these are homes that utilize the slope in ways that maintain 35 feet and continue their way down the slope. And there are homes in Rollingwood, well, and I'll show you pictures next, that do just that. So, yeah. So then at the bottom, I've taken our little Rollingwood 1-story prototype and overlaid it on these houses that terrace. And to me, that doesn't feel impactful. Like, it doesn't feel like those homes, which are much larger, really kind of impact that house, even if it's a small house. So, and then next, we can look at pretty pictures. Okay. So these are examples of homes that terrace down the slope, and they do not exceed the 35 feet. And in fact, this home is single story from the street, and you don't even see what happens back here from the street, but there's their side view as you go down. I think they did a beautiful job of working with the site. You know, they have a lot of program in this. I don't know the square footage, but oh, and I should emphasize, nobody gave me permission to use these photos. I don't know if these people, how they feel about this. They're not, you know, like, I'm not saying that they agree with anything I've said. This is just homes that are, you know, this is public information. There's pictures that I've pulled off websites or that I've taken myself. So I don't want you to think that they're advocating for anything. So that's another house that quite literally just follows the slope. It's like a perfect example at the bottom of the top plane matches the bottom plane. And yes, if you measured probably from the lowest point of that house to the highest point of that house, you know, it's going to be, I don't know what it's going to be. It's going to be above 35 feet, but it doesn't matter because at no point is that house ever more than 35 feet. And this one is just like textbook stair step going down the slope. And the back side of that also, oh, went too far. What happened? Why am I going, I thought I was, it's having aneurysm. There we go. Okay, so that top image is the other side of that house that had the stair stepping, and there's a house that might be familiar at the bottom that, like I said, I'm not, nobody here told me, I didn't get permission, but I think that if you did the sliding scale on that house, no point of it would exceed the maximum building height.
It would be 42 feet. If you look at it from the back, ground level
From the back,
to the top,
yeah.
or 42 feet.
Yeah, well, I think you could take the measurement, one thing I said is the nearest adjacent grade. So whatever the nearest adjacent grade is to the high point and measure from there. So I don't know if that's the nearest
I
or,
think if you look at it from here, it's hard to tell because
Yeah.
we're at street level.
uh-huh,
And if you look at my front door, we look like a one-story or two-story house.
right,
But then if you go around to the back, we have a basement,
yeah,
and that's an additional 8 feet,
right,
and then 35 feet on top of that.
yeah.
So if you take the measurement from there, for 43 feet. You take
On the corner or at the roof plane?
Well, if you're looking at it from this side, where you see the rooftop on the top,
Mm-hmm,
it goes all the way down to
Mm.
the bottom of the basement, and that's 43 feet.
I see, okay,
So we're definitely,
okay.
But there was a basement there originally.
there was a basement before, and we
Yeah.
just preserved the basement.
This looks like, okay.
Great job.
There's one last one, sorry. Actually, there's not one last one. I don't know what happened. Something happened. Well, there's this one, which is also kind of textbook. And then these two, okay. So these two are both really sizable homes. And I actually have a tool to measure, and they do not exceed the 35 feet height limit because of the way that they terrace down. And this is a situation where they had a lot, and there's a lot of program. These are big houses. To me, I think they did a beautiful job. I think they look beautiful on the land that they're on, and I don't think that they impact anybody's views. These are a couple of older homes in Rollingwood that do the same. They just terrace, you enter your driveway at one point and the rest of the house goes up, but it never volumetrically grows. It just moves up the slope. And I think that similar with these are the last two, but I think that it's very common to terrace in Rollingwood. People mostly have been working with the slope in that way for good reason. And I think that somehow trying to enforce our rule that says it has to be 35 feet is a potential if you have the sliding scale. And I think most people would fall under that umbrella. So, thanks for listening to my long-winded.
Thank you, Rob. That happens. So you get to do this for a living, and
I'm not getting paid, I'd like to point out.
I know. Thank you for what you're doing, though. So, I thought that was great.
Yeah.
That
I hope
very,
it was
very
helpful.
informative on that.
Okay.
It's not an easy, this is the third or fourth time, I can't keep up with them, that I have been involved in determining height of buildings in Rollingwood. And there's not a one size fits all the way
Yeah.
we've done this. We've got, I appreciate the way you're talking about making it fit with some options of stepping. And that I think that means a lot to how it would impact us with what Shanti had written before, and I think I wrote that back in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken, when I was maybe. So but I think that was what we had, a vision of what our city was going to be like. We've tried to be open to new innovative ideas into new homes for the whole time. So I think if we can kind of take all that together as we go through this, but I think that was an excellent presentation to.
It'll give us a lot to talk about.
It does. It's a lot of different information. So
Tom, are you talking about this one?
the what you read before.
This is
I
that
can't
little book
remember.
that we all got when
Yeah.
we built our home in '84.
Yeah.
So,
So, are there any questions? See, you were so complete.
I have a couple just quick comments. First of all, thank you for that. It was incredible. I do not read the building height ordinance like you do. And so I don't know, I guess,
With the additional height below the foundation?
I don't read it as you get to pick. At some point you said you could pick,
Oh.
and either way you get above 40, and
Well,
I do not read it that way. And
That's
I-
the gamesmanship part
No,
of it.
I get it.
Yeah.
If I could just finish.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I am a lawyer, so I do read statutes. I litigate statutes for a living. I've argued 10 times in the Texas Supreme Court. I've had, I think, dozens of Texas Supreme Court cases, most of which are arguing over what words mean. And I just read it differently. And I just think that's important to point out. And then second, I mean, I think it's really important that one of the houses that's in here that I think is quite beautiful, which is Councilmember Hundley's house, would not be allowed under the floated kind of proposal. And I think if we get into places where I think 100 out of 100 people in our neighborhood would agree that that's a beautiful house that we wouldn't want to bar. If we get into a set of rules where we're barring things that we all agree are beautiful, I'd frankly rather have a few houses that we don't all agree we don't want than to have houses that we all agree are beautiful and that we would want in our neighborhood to get barred. 401 Vale. And I did take the time to go look at it because I wondered whether how it fit in, because I think it's an example of a sloped lot backwards.
Yeah.
Which I really think, I mean, the slope lot forwards creates very different issues than the slope lot backwards, the slope lot sideways. Like you said, what's behind the slope, if it's a green belt, is very different from if it's a house.
Which is the case in Wendy's house. So she might fall into that district.
That's compliant.
It would not be compliant with the proposal.
With the proposal,
That-
because of not enough discrepancy in the slope on the lot?
Because if you are forced to terrace, you have to go down constantly. So you can't have height. So
But you did terrace, you used the garage.
No. not in the back.
I'm sorry.
Wendy Hendley, 401 Vale Street. Thank you for the compliment on my house. Appreciate that. We love it, and we're very happy and proud and grateful that we have that opportunity to have that home. But the reason that our home wouldn't be compliant is from the street, we're at street level, and we have a basement, right, that was there before. And so if you look at our home, in order for it to be compliant, we couldn't have the second story on the first street, because the way our home is built is we have street level, we have 11 feet, and then a second story that is 10 feet. And then below that, we have a basement that's 8 feet. So you have 8 plus 11 plus 10, so we're 43. If you're looking at our house from the back, from the behind our house, and this is the basement, then when you look up to the highest point, that's 43 feet. Because we slope from the front to the back. So if that house was built the opposite way, and that 43 feet was facing the street, you might find it more offensive.
That's right.
From the street.
From the street,
From
you,
the elevation of the street.
it's
That's not
perfectly beautiful.
43, that's
It's
not.
35
It's 35.
from the elevation of the street.
that's
So
right.
isn't that compliant?
No, not with the proposal, because it can only be
Because I would
35
have
from
to-
any point.
I could only have a 2-story house if we had the terrace down.
Well, one of the things we've talked about is that there's a benefit for having a basement or side entry garages or things like that. And so I think you might fall into the basement, particularly because you are back sloping and you face a green belt, which could potentially be a zoning district. So I don't think we want to have homes that are 4 stories or 3 or 4 that have a basement that face the street, like 3225 Park Hills. But I think that when the impacts are mitigated, because it's at the back and all those things I mentioned, and it's a partial basement, I think we've been talking about that being, you know, a potential talking point, as there might be some, you know, leverage there. So
Yeah, I think my comment from having built a home and having people around me who've built homes is that additional 10 feet is important when you're on a sloped lot. And I don't think that terracing down would help solve problems in our neighborhood, because it would have people expanding their homes to go wider instead of building up. Because if I would have had to build what I built in order to have my kids' bedrooms, if I couldn't exceed the 35 feet, then I would have had to go out and then build up to 35 feet instead of being able to build it on top of the basement.
And yours is not a massive house, right?
No.
So
Depends
relative
on-
to the new ones,
Yeah, I mean,
it's-
some people have really big houses, but I think my house is way bigger than I meant to build it.
Sure, but it's not like 8,000 square feet, right?
It is HVAC 5,200, and then the large covered porches, it's like 7,000.
So if you couldn't do what you did under this idea, you would have, to get your kids' bedrooms the way you wanted them, you would have had to then build over your backyard more, right?
I would have had to take out a lot of trees, and I would have had to spread it out instead of going up.
So you would have gotten rid of green space.
I would have gotten rid of green space. And if you look at my house from Google Maps, I have a very small footprint, but I have a pretty big house. So, and I think that, to your point, and you did such a good job on your presentation, by the way. Thank you for all of that work. And then to your point, that is thoughtful architecture. We have a really great architect, LaRue, Jim LaRue, who really thought about our space and put it like he wanted it to belong there. So I'm really grateful for that. I see you tried to ask me a question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm just going to note it's 31% FAR
Okay.
according to TCAD. So it's kind of at the lower end of what we were kind of discussing here.
But I think also that that's maybe not completely accurate because of our large outdoor spaces that aren't HVAC'd. So that could be, but maybe it is. I mean, I'm not sure how you calculated it.
Depends on what you count.
Yeah.
We haven't got to a
Yeah.
calculation.
I also think
I'm
that
still
it's-
trying to understand like the calculations, and I haven't seen where all the houses are. Did y'all put that database out in the, I haven't seen
I
the
can check with the
database.
city, but we can add it.
Yeah, I mean,
the
that would be
source
interesting to
documents, yeah.
see, because I haven't seen that data, so I'm just kind of trying to guess.
I think it might be in the agenda packet.
It's in the agenda package, but it
today's?
was added
Okay.
later.
Yeah, so I'll look at that, but again, thank you for your time putting that together. I think
You
it's a
got it.
great exercise and really good data, so.
One thing I want to say is that with respect to like at least the way I read the ordinance, which may be wrong, it's not like you get extra height in the sense of your house gets to be higher. I think that's a big misunderstanding. Your house does not get to be higher with your 10 extra feet. It's just that you don't have to slope it downward where your slope goes down. So the I call it absolute height, which means that the top place on your roof doesn't get to go any higher because of those 10 feet. It just means that when your house slopes downward, your roof doesn't have to slope with it. So your house can be relatively flat over the slope that's going downward.
That's a great point, because I think for me, we wanted to have a living area that was all like one living area. So in order to accomplish that, when you're on a slope, you have to build something under it. You can't build out without putting something under it, because physics doesn't work like that. And that's what the 10 feet is for, right? Because anytime you're here and you have a slope like this, you have to put something under it or your house will crush, or you have to have a waterfall house. And so I think that probably in the past, our neighbors may have terraced their houses because it's really expensive to build a big foundation or to dig, and it's just, there's more affluent people in the neighborhood who are spending some money to build taller foundations, to build out of the flood zones, or to build because they want that single level living as opposed to having a lot of different elevations where you have a sunken living room and you have to go up to a dining room or whatnot. So I think that's a great point of terracing a house. A lot of people want, like, for a good example is my next door neighbor. Her house slopes even more than mine, but she's got a 1-story house. She's in a wheelchair, so she can't have stairs. So for her to build on that lot on a 1-story house, she's got a 12-foot foundation in the back. And she didn't build a garage because she can't use stairs. So for her to build the house that she wanted on that lot, she had to be able to use that 10 feet for physics to keep her floor 1 story.
I think it's worth noting, and I didn't mention it, but like the 2 big Buzzy Woodworth houses that are on the end of Hatley, what he did there was, that's a single story all the way across. It doesn't have stairs, but then there's a 2nd story up here, and there's a below story here. So the bulk of the house is all 1 level. So I get
That's
it. That,
Jim LaRue as well.
Oh, I know.
That's our
He is.
He's
yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah. So
But the size of that lot makes that happen. Like if you have
Yeah.
a much smaller lot, you can't have this huge 1-story that goes, I mean, that is a massive, both of those are massive lots.
Yeah, the lot next door to us is a good example to look at why somebody may need to have a 1-story house on a slope that has that steep back wall that maybe, I look at it from my backyard and she grew vines and I feel like it's private. I'm not looking at windows of people looking at me. I don't mind it, even though it's a big wall of concrete. It doesn't bother us.
And that's not to say that, like this, even though the absolute height of the building is not higher from this 10 feet, it's really you get to go down 10, not that you get to go up 10. But that's not to say that when you have a wall of that 40 feet that it's not an imposing thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm not trying to argue that your experience is not real. It is. And if I had a 40-foot wall next to me, I'd probably not like it either.
We all know that there's some houses in the neighborhood, and I think I know what house that you're talking about, that have been built for spite or for reasons that are not to build a beautiful home, and that I'm sorry that happened. And hopefully we will not have the disputes in the neighborhood that lead to something like that again. But that was crazy, and it's not a normal house that somebody would build. I think that is a crazy situation, and I also think that the other house that was built, the builder came into the meeting and he was like, I didn't even know it was going to be that big. Like, whoops, that was my bad, and that was terrible. And you know, I think those are really good examples of houses that we don't want. But I like
That's a resolution if you live next door.
I like what you said though. Like, we have these one-offs, but I don't think that we should change our whole zoning to prohibit these beautiful custom homes. That you made that point as well, because we've had some people who come in and been bad actors.
Yeah. And I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I mean, I'm want to listen to the neighborhood, and if the consensus of the neighborhood is that there are some examples that we need to prevent in the future, then I'm all about figuring out a way to meaningfully, modestly prevent them, but not in a way that hurts people who, you know, want to invest their whole lifetime of savings into a big, beautiful house that does fit naturally in the neighborhood like yours does. I mean, I would have a real problem doing that.
I just think the point of regulations is to prevent, because those one-off situations do exist. I'm sorry.
No, could you give your name?
Yeah.
Oh, Richard Doshi. And so those one-off situations exist, and they're existing at a higher rate. And there's nothing, and talking about someone putting their heart and soul into a house, that's what I did. I bought a home that I thought was going to be beautiful, and now I'm in a situation where I'm in that third box over there. A tower is next to me, 7.5 feet away from my lot line, and I'm staring at a wall.
Yeah.
And that's something that is now becoming, there was a previous house, the Park Hills house, there's this house. Builders know they can exploit these rules, so what now is the exception and a bad actor, given the precedent to build these types of homes without change in regulation, the precedent is going to become the rule, particularly because those homes are profitable.
Well, we'll see. 2 of them haven't sold.
But it's a recession. But
yeah,
yeah, but at the end of the day, it's you know, regulation is allowing this to flourish, and I'm not only concerned about this house next to me. I mean, the house I was talking to a neighbor, the house across the street, when it sells, is it going to be 40 feet up facing the street? We have a lot of those on my drive, Pleasant Drive, where we have kind of the front-facing slopes, and I understand. I think that's where exemptions come in, where a basement or whatever in the back, not near 20 feet within a neighbor. I don't know how you guys construct that, but your house isn't. The next house isn't 10 feet away from you. You're not at the edge of your lot line with 45 feet staring right into someone else's house that's downhill from you. Very different kind of
And
situation.
your 45 feet is at the top of your roof, which is a hipped roof. So it's not like you have a.
Yeah, I think it just depends on where you're measuring from.
Yeah.
Because if
Yeah.
you're saying no portion of any house should exceed 45 feet or 35
35.
feet, then there's a portion of my house that, a large portion of my house that exceeds 45 feet from the
And
ground.
the reason
No,
that-
is it edge to edge, like so.
No, so the
No,
reason,
that's not what-
the
yes,
reason
that's-
hers isn't imposing is because of where that is. And that's my point. That dictating that there shall never be is harmful. Figuring out where not to allow. Because if 45 feet is in the smack dab in the middle of the lot, of a sloping lot, where you don't even know it, everybody's saying that, like, most people are saying they can't imagine, they're having trouble figuring out how Wendy's violates the idea. And that's my point, is that, and I would guess that there are some houses that are at 35 feet that are a wall really close to a house that look terribly imposing. And some houses that are at 43 feet that don't have a wall right next to their lot line that are not imposing at all. And so to me, I'm more interested in solving the imposing problem, which is the problem that you have, than I am of dictating that people have sunken living rooms.
And that's why I think the tent situation.
I actually, that to me is interesting, but again, I want to hear what the community thinks. And
Yeah, good. Sandy, if you would just state your name.
So sorry. Thank you all.
Thank you, Wendy.
Sandy Keller, 307 Inwood. Just as a follow-up to trying to have the flexibility and the permeability, or whatever you want to call it, the one problem I see with that is we have an asymmetrical relationship right now in Rollingwood in terms of when a builder, developer, or even a person who has a definitive idea of what they want to build comes in, their focus is utterly, intently on pushing through what they want. On the other side of the building process, we have a more amorphous, more diffuse city system where a variety of people handle different aspects of it, and no one is as focused or intent on the outcome on the city side. And therefore, if we can't delineate some very practical, reasoned rules, I think this asymmetry is going to continue to allow the kinds of issues that have been described here this evening. So I agree.
Well-
I'd like
well
to
said.
see. I'd like to see flexibility, but I also see a continuing problem until we tighten some things up.
So
And
on
I'm
that-
not saying,
that's what the data
and I'm not
shows.
suggesting that it be discretionary and flexible. What I'm suggesting is that whatever we come up with, solve the problem that we have and not solve a problem that we don't have.
Okay, and that's
Good.
reasonable, but ...
On that note, could we use the last 10 minutes to figure out where we're going from here? Because I think there's a lot of ideas Alex and I have been discussing. We're not.
I'll get there.
Shanti Jaykumar, 3309 Park Hills Drive. Thank you for an excellent presentation. Really could relate to what you were talking about. And some of you know this. Quickly, I'll tell you, in 2003, after our sewer lines were put in, before that, we had different set of regulations under which we built our homes because we had a huge septic field. My house is set about 40 feet from the curb because we had, evapotransportive septic system, one field in 1 month, and you shifted So it was a septic system. So a lot of our homes that were built before the sewer lines, and thanks to Tom, we have sewer lines, which were really necessary because there were a lot of problems going on with many older homes. So people built differently prior to 2000, maybe 2004. And then it was like everybody could build to the extent they, setback to setback. But still, the large portion of that type of thing did not happen until the last 10 years or so. And I took pictures in 2004, Flo Macklin and I. We went around and took pictures of every single home in Rollingwood. I have 2 albums, and y'all are welcome to see it anytime you want. So that she was concerned that one by one the houses were coming down, and we would never know what Rollingwood looked like. She and I were historians. I'm still continuing to document history. But we did that, and then we went back in and took pictures of the after. And then we also went back and asked the people when they built it, how much they paid for the lot, and who built it. That didn't go very far because that was too ambitious a project. Okay? So we put it all at the back of each sleeve. I have a before and after for a lot of the homes. And now it's exponential, and it's beyond me to try and go and take pictures anymore. But I just want to tell y'all that one of the things that y'all were discussing about Wendy's home, 401 Vale, she backs up to a green belt. I'm talking about people who have to face a big house, like somebody across the street from 3225 Park Hills Drive has to look at it every single day, or to the side of each. So we're not protecting the neighbors when we allow even 35, 45, whatever. It's just not about height alone, but taking away from another property owner's right and the pleasure to enjoy the privacy of their backyard. I mean, there are people who tell me that they are afraid when they go out to have a shower because that house can look right into their house. That's not protecting property rights. It's the property rights of the more wealthy people who can come in and build these big homes. I don't want to call it a wealthy versus whatever. We are all rich in so many ways here in Rollingwood because we're fortunate to live in 1 square mile city and know each other and get to know each other. We need to respect people's privacy because an $8 million home and a $3 million home, to me, should have compatibility in terms of how you enjoy that property. So therefore, our setbacks are the only way we can protect our drainage, which is another huge issue for people's property. Because if they get flooded, they're the ones having to replace whatever it was that is their life savings. It's a life savings for everybody. So to have an equitable base, let's not take the one off with people who are backing up to a green belt, regardless of. Nobody's looking at.
No.
So we need to take examples of where along the street. I mean, I've been looking at this for a long time, taking pictures whenever I see something that is unusual, and I can see that some people are really gaming the system. I don't know who's really enforcing the setbacks. Are we doing that? Those are type of the things I think if y'all could delineate on a, 90% of the people will appreciate that. There may be 5% who want to do whatever they want, and we really cannot stop people to some extent, So that's my point, and I thought I should tell you that's how I feel.
I just want to mention really quickly is that I have not heard any complaints of a setback rule being violated. So, and maybe there are some, but yeah. So that's not the cause of the homes being imposing. It's not and maybe the setback should be altered, but lack of enforcement of the current setbacks is not the cause of houses feeling imposed.
Yeah, and I'm talking over time. Okay, I'm not talking a one-off or in the last 1 month or 2 months. I'm talking over time, how little by little people have been pushing their limits on how
Yeah, I mean, I think
bigger house they
they've
can
been
build.
approaching the setbacks more, but they're not, I don't, again, I'm
Yeah.
not aware of anybody going
Well, we have
beyond the
some
setback.
definition issues on that.
Yeah.
Let me,
Yeah,
Those
well,
are
that's true.
things that
Yeah.
push beyond this, those are
Oh,
all things
go ahead.
that encroach within the parameters
Definitely the eaves,
intended.
absolutely.
Brooke Brown, 307 Nixon. The council has adopted one change in ordinance that did address setbacks, and that was to tighten up what can extend from the building line to the setback.
Yeah.
And so part of the issue with the 3225 property was that the roof virtually extends to almost, in certain for part of the building, the roof extends well into the setback. So now we've tightened that up. So that does impact the adjacent neighbors.
And can I ask you, does the top level on the front overset the setback as well? Because when I look at it from the
In part.
side,
In part.
yeah, okay. So that whole upper volume seems to go over the front setback because it's out forward of the foundation.
it was surveyed, and I think that,
I was just curious, yeah.
I don't think,
The survey was done of the height
I think they
because
did.
we didn't have an ordinance that controlled
Yeah.
what the extensions of the roofs into the setback at that point in time. But we did do a survey of the height, and it did exceed the maximum height. And the other thing the council did this last week was to, instead of having a 5-foot perimeter around the building in which to measure the high and low point, we've removed that so that it's the perimeter of the building, so that you are, the 35-foot or 45-foot is now measured on the basis of the slope under the footprint of the building, as opposed to picking a point either higher or lower in order to add the 10 feet when the slope itself was less than that. So we've tightened it up a bit, but we haven't changed the height. And that's all I wanted to clarify.
Thank you, Brooke.
And we're working on an ordinance that would add survey requirements so that we can verify the datum reference and the height as it's built. Thank you.
Great. Try to get, item number 3, discussion possible action to assign subcommittees for survey, building height, building size, lot ratio, setbacks, trees, and compliance. And that'll cover a lot of what we've talked about on that. So I have a couple suggestions, and I hope this will be satisfactory. Obviously, I think the survey is probably one of our most important tools going forward on this to get an idea about what our citizens want. Ryan, if you don't, would you mind working on that with, and I think Jeff, you had indicated you wanted to be involved with that.
And I think Dave did too, at
So
the last meeting.
I have a concern with that around how we communicate, because if we have to follow Open Meetings Act,
It's
and
only 2 that we can.
I think that should be addressed first before we do subcommittees, because
Okay.
I would recommend that the items are also interrelated. That I would recommend splitting us into 2 groups of 3 and having one group of 3 focus on A, B, and C, and the other group of 3 focus on D and F.
For me to do that, I think we're gonna have to get, we'd have to go back on the guidance of on number 6 for our city council, and I'm not opposed to doing that before we do that, because I think that would probably be a better use of our time to do it that way.
What do you mean?
Well, if I have 3 people on there, it's gonna be,
But it's not a quorum at
it's
3.
not a quorum, we can do 3. We had just talked about what we can do it, we can do it, you're right, I'm sorry, I was thinking of something else. So we would do that. So we would take, survey, building height, I've got 7 items on that. Compliance is a separate item, the way I looked at it. So Jeff, how would you propose to do that? Survey, building height, building size. The lot ratio and the building size is, I think, a natural fit together. The survey, I think, should be separate, because I think that's just me thinking that.
So what work is left to do for, so like Alex and I have been talking about height, size, lot ratios exhaustively.
Yes.
I think we've exhausted it other than engaging with the community. That's the last step.
No, I
And then
agree.
that links to the survey, right? So it's hard to separate survey from everything else. Because any issue you talk about, you're going to want to talk to the person working on the survey. And if we're not allowed to all talk to each other, this whole project is very difficult to do, in my view. But we can try to do it. If you want to just have 3 of us do the project and the other 3 come to the meetings, we could do that. It's hard to have it split into 2 groups. One of us do survey, the other 3 do other things. Because I think we're at the stage now where survey is what's left to engage on.
Okay. So Dave wanted to be on the survey, and Ryan and Jeff.
And
But
I've
Alex has
spent
done
some
all the
time.
work, so I want Alex has about 50 survey questions she's written, so I want her working on the survey. Which is again, I go back to the Open Meetings Act. It's just very tough
I don't
to
have
do
to be
this.
on it if they want to do it. It's fine.
We will, my idea of the subcommittees is you'll bring it in and we'll have a discussion about it in a public meeting so we can address it at that point if we want to make some changes on it, to do it. If that works for you?
Yeah.
Okay. $1,000 to you. So we'll do it, would that work, Jeff, with you and Alex and Dave doing that? Okay.
That's what.
Let's do that. And you're right about the height. I would just say one thing. Remember, Dave did a lot of work on
Right.
the height also.
And I'm disappointed he wasn't here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a funny story. I'll tell y'all later. But yes,
Yeah.
he is. He did do a lot of work on that too. And
Yeah.
I want to make sure when we have our public meetings, that we include his work with yours as we do that, because I think it was important. And Jeff, I think you're exactly right. I'm not sure what else we're going to do with Dave's information and Alex's information on height. I think we have enough to present to the public as to what they want on that. The lot ratios, I don't know how else we'd get much more than what you've done on that right now to start with, to get that. Setbacks and our tree ordinance and compliance. I think compliance is something that we're getting a lot of feedback on, that people don't feel like that their city's getting, that we're having some problems, although when you look at the details, I don't think that they're near the problems that we think we have on that part. But there are some things like that I think that we need to address as we go forward on make sure that we at least cover that as a base that we go forward with. May not want to do a subcommittee on compliance. We may want to just do that after we do the recommendations, as to have that as a separate item. So I think right now, let's just do, let's leave it as starting off with just the survey as a subcommittee. Because I think that's the most important thing in my mind as to what we should have coming in on that. And then if we need to come back on any of these others, we will.
Do you have a timeline for what would be good to get the survey out?
I think as soon as we get it out, the better. There's going to be a summer vacation for everybody that's coming up. And you know, we're going to miss some people. I always have, I think the general rule is 25%. If you get a 25% acceptance rate on a survey, that's supposed to be pretty good. Isn't that, wasn't that what you told me, Desiree?
25 to 30.
Yeah. And I always get disappointed that I can't imagine that we don't get 100%, but we don't. So, you know, I always disappointed we don't. That's the way it is.
And what is the appropriate time frame to give people to respond to a survey?
I would, if you let it sit there, I'll have to rely on some people that do this better than I do. I expected an immediate turnaround, but we don't ever
Like
get
2
that.
weeks? Is that?
Ryan, what did we?
I don't recall, but it was a lot of reminders and plenty of time for people to.
Yeah.
yeah, respond.
So I think there's a lot of institutional knowledge around the survey from last time. So we would need to figure out how to carry that over. Like I would want Ryan to be a part of the survey because he did the survey last time. He did all the work, right? So we
Done a
need to
great
figure.
job, I might add, right?
Yeah, we need to figure out how to carry that forward. Like I would want Ryan to be part of this. I want the CRC to be doing this together between the meetings is what I want. But if we can't do that, we're gonna have to figure out how to.
Well, I'm gonna try to get that changed a little
Okay.
bit too, just,
I mean, well, I personally think that work should be done in front of the public.
yeah.
Public work should be done in front of the public. It's certainly possible, and that what we did last time is that a couple people put together a draft. It got posted on the agenda. At the meeting, people gave comments, said, I don't like this, I do like this. We went back. I mean, we probably went back
3 times.
3 or 4 times.
Yes,
It was
we
not, it wasn't just proposed and sent out.
It wasn't the best, it wasn't a business, it wasn't what you would do normally in your business deal, but for doing it, when you're dealing with a public entity, it's unfortunately what
Yeah, it's not
what
fast.
you have to do.
If you,
we were making sausage and that's all. That's just what you do.
I can step off the survey so that I do think we need some carryover of last time in terms of the infrastructure that's involved in building out the survey. Like I just don't know where, like what do we do? We have the list of questions ready. What's the next step? How do we actually get that out to the public? What do we need to do? What are the next steps? We discuss that in the next meeting. Like I don't know what we did last time. Alex doesn't know either. Dave doesn't know either. So
We sent it out,
I think the city worked with the, Ashley's on here.
Survey Monkey.
Worked with the, there was a marketing branding company, right, that helped us?
Yeah.
And they actually took the questions and turned them into a survey format. I mean, we told them exactly what we wanted, but
Okay.
then they took it and turned it into a survey that then the city sent out to all of the neighbors.
So maybe the subcommittees I would recommend would just be between meetings, right? So we
Yes.
could say for the next 2 weeks, these folks will work on the survey, present the draft to the group. In the next meeting, it'll enter the agenda, and then we'll figure out what to do about that in the next meeting.
That's correct.
Okay.
And so,
Sounds
why don't we do this, unless Ryan, you think you need to be there? I think from just doing the surveys, we can give you the institutional knowledge of how we did it
Yep.
at the next meeting as it comes in. That's probably a better deal.
I'm on vacation next week, so I can be off this for until the next meeting, right? Because I'm not going to be adding a lot of value
Okay,
between now and the next meeting. So
all right.
I may be in the minority, but I don't feel like I have enough information to add
To do the survey yet?
to ask the right questions. I still feel like I'm very much in the investigation stage of what it is the community wants.
And on that point, I thought an open-ended survey at this stage, like very hastily done, quickly get it out there, kind of like more structured format
You
of
get
the
one shot.
only one shot. Okay.
I just, people get survey fatigue.
Okay.
And we've had, I thought that was one of the issues that, we got a great response last time, but it came on the heels of a survey that had occurred, 4 months, 5 or 6 months before. And people said, well, I've already filled out the survey. Well, it's a different survey.
Fair point. Then I think everyone who's watching, everyone in the room, if they can email city, right, to answer Ryan's question, what is the issue? What are we trying to solve for? The emails help. We've created some survey-like metrics around those emails, so we can at least try to address that concern that you have. I feel like I've seen enough in the emails. There's like 35 of them now. It's a pretty substantial percentage of the neighborhood.
Why don't we start with the survey, and then, but it's not going to be finalized until we go get a little bit more data on that. I think I'm with Ryan on. There's still some questions I have on that. It's going to take me a while, quite frankly, to just absorb what y'all's data was tonight. I thought that was great. That was I think that was, I think it was gonna be, it's gonna take me a day or two to catch up on that, really.
So I think it could help to go, the emails, I think we need a central place for everyone to be able to read them, because I think even in our data set, I didn't get all the emails. And then the source documents is a good place if you want to brush up on info. I'll make sure all of my info is in there.
Right.
And Alex, if you could do the same,
Yeah.
so that everyone in our group is up to speed on everything.
Desiree, now, our Dropbox is
It's up and running.
up and running.
Yeah, there's
And
lots of
that-
files on
And
there.
I did
They are
that,
on it.
yeah.
Yep.
She did good.
Anything that's slowing this down is not staff, I'm telling you, they are on it.
And I think Desiree wanted to make this point, but I'll help you out here. I think that some of us were late adding our agenda
That's
items
gonna-
to the packet, and I think it would be helpful if we had these survey questions well in advance, so everybody
Yeah.
has a chance.
Well,
Sort of-
Desiree
that's
has
my fault.
informed me that if I didn't bring that up on item number 9, she was gonna throw something at me.
Okay, well, I'm throwing myself under the
And I
bus.
appreciate it. So, let's just call this a preliminary survey of questions that we're gonna start with. We're gonna add to it as we go forward on that. So, if we could get Alex and Jeff and Dave to start this process, not a rush on, because I think we need to get, the survey needs to be one of the most deliberate items that we're doing as we go forward on that. So, because, well, we'll go from there. Okay. Number 4, discussion and possible action to schedule a general public workshop. I had thought that this was going to be sometime in the second week of July, is in the back of my mind on that. I think we need at least 2 more meetings before we schedule a public workshop, because I think there's still some issues out there that we have to know. I thought that the height deal that you went through today and what Ryan was talking about, we need to kind of digest how we would look at that, because it's going to be questions. It's not going to be that people are going to say, gee, this is my idea about what the height's going to be. They're going to question what data that you've given them on that. That's what's going to happen on that. Or at least that's my experience on the workshops on that. But I thought we had a workshop right here tonight,
Yeah, it's
and
good
I
turnout.
really want that to be a
I know.
format that,
If we could just get 7 or 8 people to come to every meeting, we'd be in a lot better shape.
well, at our next meeting, I think we will have at least 2 homeowners that have just finished homes. And I can invite a spec builder, I don't know if they'll show up, but they might, to tell me to tell us what their logic was about what they did on that.
It's a good idea.
So I can get that, and I think that's great on that, so generally, I'm not gonna put a time on this. We've got I'm thinking in my mind that the second week of July, and this is kind of a personal deal with me, I'm not gonna be available until after the first week of July.
I will not be here for July.
And doesn't mean I have to be here for that, but I just won't be here.
At the last meeting, we had voted to wait until we had a proposal. I'm not sure that, after talking to you privately, that you agree with that, or that even I agree with it anymore. But that's what the current vote of the committee is. But I think it sounds like you're saying you don't want to do it soon anyway, so.
Is that gonna cause an issue with anybody?
I think the sooner the better. I think I'd prefer it before the survey. I think it would help forming the survey questions.
Okay.
So my personal
we can
view
do
is
it
the
the
sooner
other
the
way
better,
around.
but
Well, remember, we don't have to have a public hearing. I mean, I had envisioned that we would have at least 2 or 3 public hearings. 2 to get information from the public, 2 opportunities for people to speak, even though each meeting is like that. And then final, public meeting to say, here are our findings, here are gonna be our recommendations, give us your comments on that. That's what my thought was. It takes it's pulling teeth to get, I mean, we had 7 people here tonight, which is great.
That was awesome.
Well, it's still, until every chair is
I know,
full and people standing up.
It's better.
I do agree that the format where people don't have to go up to the mic and all of that would be more conducive to kind of a better discussion, like more to discuss. I mean, I agree with some of the formality of it is important, but at the same time, you know, you lose a lot when.
Yeah, the reason that we asked them to do that is for the minutes and for.
Oh, right.
Because they
Yeah.
have a real hard time.
Yeah, I get you.
Also,
Who's
anybody
speaking?
watching online can't hear unless they speak into the mic.
Yeah,
And
So-
we do have very weak microphones, so
Yeah.
sometimes you have to be very in
Right.
mic to speak.
Well, would y'all prefer to have the first public meeting that we advertise on just as a public meeting, public workshop in June?
yeah, is that like, the next meeting that we have?
That would be my preference.
Yeah. June
That's right, what's that
June
next?
13th.
I think the earliest one we could have it at is June 27th, if you were planning on putting the notification of it in the utility billing, just for the
Yeah.
timing of that and how it goes out. It will go out the first week of June. If we had it on the 13th, they may or may not see it before, like the notification that there's
Yeah.
going to be.
I leave town on the 17th. I
Okay.
will have access to Zoom, but I'm kind of out of pocket for about 6 weeks. So. And I'll only be on Zoom for like 2 of those weeks.
And if we're going to send out postcards, we need that time as well.
No. So,
We could do 2.
yeah,
We don't have to have a postcard.
I mean, is there not a reason that we have to wait for the water bill? Could we still do June 13th? I mean, that's 3 weeks from now, right? I don't know. It
I
just
like
is
that
an option.
proposal of doing that one and then doing the July date that you recommended.
yeah.
We can do two dates.
Mhm.
I like that proposal.
Would y'all have a spot for us on the 13th of June? Are you gonna be here?
I'll be out of town, but that's all right.
You may have to run it.
I can't promise I'll be here, but
So you won't be here?
I probably won't.
well, Dave will be back.
Dave?
I don't think, I'm gonna, I'll be out of town, and it does, just in Houston, but I think I can get back, maybe. I don't know
Yeah,
yet.
and we
to
don't
be
know
honest.
about Duke or Dave if they'll both
We
for
do
sure
have
be
to
here.
have a quorum
Yeah.
present
so-
too. So you can still vote if you're on Zoom, but we have to have a quorum present too.
I have to have 4 here.
So you'll be here on the 13th. I'll be
June
here.
13, yeah.
And we don't know for sure about Dave or Duke.
I'll just check with them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's just
Scheduling.
tentatively set that up if, for the 13th, and then, we will, if that doesn't work, we'll notify you. Okay?
On item 5, do you mind going to item 5
We're there.
momentarily? How did the communication that got sent out? Go out?
Last time?
It was like last week. There was an email
On
that went
Friday.
out. On Friday.
We
Where
sent-
did that come from?
It came from the city.
No, but like where the message? Who wrote it? I was just trying to figure out what it came from.
Which message? The agenda and packet are posted?
No, the text that went out saying that
I didn't get the
That was
text.
Swift or Raven, it was done by Ashley.
Yeah.
Ashley wrote it. Okay.
I didn't get the text, so I don't know what you're
It
talking
was
about.
an email.
Oh, was it email?
You didn't get it?
I thought it was a text.
So I wonder why you're not.
Maybe I
getting
didn't see it, but-
stuff.
There was a text regarding something else, I believe, but then there was an email from me that's just the agenda and packet are posted, and that will happen every Friday.
Yeah, no, I
Before a
meant the,
meeting.
the community message that went out. Swift, so it was text, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
text
that's what I
and
thought.
email.
Okay.
Both. Did that work? Or we had to-
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't what I would have written, but it went out and it got people here, so I think that's the most important thing.
Right.
So I don't have an agenda item. I mean, I don't have a motion on that, so you're welcome to keep going.
Number 6, I'm gonna ask the council for just a little more guidance on timing that they've asked for, because I think we need to make a few changes on that. I think I'll make sure that Desiree copies everybody on what I think we need to do from a timing standpoint.
So my questions on 6 were both scope and timing. So, and I'm glad we have 2 council members here so they can at least hear what I have to say. The first is on scope. And at the last meeting, we talked about how there were residential issues that don't have to do necessarily to do with the residential code, and whether that is in the scope of what they want us to look at. And that's things like, I don't know, sidewalks or street lighting or speed bumps or speed limits. There's been a huge discussion in the neighborhood recently in the last week about people wanting lower speed limits. Are those things that the council wants us to think about as part of a comprehensive residential plan, or is it merely focused on the code review? So that's my first question. And the second question is timing. Is it more important to get to an answer to a proposal as quickly as possible, or is it more important to be as inclusive and extensive as possible in getting public feedback? And those are not aligned. Those pull in different directions. So is it like, we would really like a proposal in 6 months from when you started so that we can pass something because we're worried about the building, the new ones coming in? Or is it take as much time as you think you guys want it to be as inclusive as possible, and hopefully at the end of this process have a solution that the neighborhood can get around? So those are the issues that I would like you to pose to council.
I will do so.
Can I add to that? So there's certain items, Councilmember Brown brought up earlier, council's discussing certain things relevant to residential code right now. So do they want us to help them with that? Do they want us to solicit input from the community on that? Do they want short-term information? Do they want us working on things that will help with that in addition to the long-term goals of this? Would that be helpful at all?
I may invite them, if they have something they would like to include in the survey, it'd be cost effective for us to include that as we go forward. And remember, it's not only what the council's doing, but the legislature has some rules pending that will affect our building code. That are out there. Especially, I think the one that's already going to pass for sure is going to be the accessory building deal. Limit our ability to regulate the accessory buildings. So, but I think there's some others out there too that may pass. We're not the target on that, incidentally, but we are collateral damage to whether I like those those buildings or not, doesn't matter. I don't like to see the legislature tell cities what they should do. We're smart enough to figure out what we want. So, anyway.
That's all I had on that.
Yeah, I'm gonna go on that. Item number 9 is our future meeting, and right now we are tentatively set up for June 13th. I believe that's what that date was. For our next meeting, which is going to be a public workshop. So, and I'll just tell you, I know this is a little different. Doing a public meeting on that, the earliest you can do it is 6 o'clock. And if you want to be optimistic, which I am, we're gonna have 50 people here, and it will be longer than 2 hours. So it just goes on workshops like this for public meetings. I'm just a believer that you just let it go as long as it'll go on that. And if somebody needs to leave, they leave. So,
At some point, I mean, this item includes agenda topics for the future. It probably shouldn't be at the public meeting, but I would love to get a presentation on trees from someone in the know. Maybe even someone who was integral to the tree ordinance passing in its current state, to at least come to talk to us about what the issues are, what the feedback was at the time, what were the pressure points at that time, because I do think even if we're just looking at code, that seems to be something that people are talking about a lot. And I think there's probably more demand now for a more restrictive tree ordinance than there was even just a year ago or 2 years ago when that passed. Because people are seeing the consequences of not having it. It's right in our face.
yeah.
And so I think it'd be nice to get somebody who knows a lot about that to come talk to us.
This is my I told you so moment with the trees. I tried and tried. That's all I'll tell you. Okay. Well, our time is well over.
Yep.
And I do apologize for that. I have a motion to adjourn.
Hold on, Tom.
Oh.
To throw something at you.
Wait a minute, I thought we already did that.
I wanted to put the exact deadline on it. So when we're having meetings on the Tuesdays, this may not apply to the public workshop, I don't know. But we need to have items that you would like on the agenda by the Wednesday prior at 5 p.m. in order for us to create the agenda, get it ready by Friday. And then for the items that you'd like to put in the agenda packet as follow-up, we would like those by Friday at noon, so we can have those in by Friday at 5 when we email you, say the agenda is posted and the agenda packet is posted, and that will give everyone on the committee time to look over that information prior to the meeting. If there's last-minute presentations, we definitely can make changes, but it makes it fair to everyone to look at and also for the public to see what you're working on.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. Would you mind sending out deal to everybody on that, because we've got members that are not here. We have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Favor?